Good evening to you, everybody. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to the Hurricane Hub discussion for June 15th, 2023. Haven't posted in a minute, but I'm back here again. I'm going to post for you guys again, especially now things are getting interesting in the Atlantic. And as I did say, that activity is going to come eventually. Um, and it certainly is not only in the Atlantic but in the Eastern Pacific as well. Probably aware of that, but I'll go over that. But especially the Atlantic part, which is, I believe, new as of today, or I think maybe new as of yesterday. I don't know. I kind of lost track of time. But yes, you are seeing this right. We are tracking a MDR area of interest that is all the way right now out by Africa. Low chance, of course, because this is very uncertain, and it's also a very long range thing that we're watching with this too. But models are showing potentially something trying to get going in the eastern central MDR. Very unusual, of course, for this time of year, although there's definitely a lot of model support and definitely some sort of signature there that models are picking up on. And of course, you can definitely see that reflected in the 7 day forecast, a very long cone for potential development. And depending on what model you look at, it does actually kind of get interesting when you get into the extra long range. But knowing some model biases, and especially this time of year, sometimes you got to be cautious with that. But in the Eastern Pacific, there are two areas of interest now. The Eastern Pacific is finally coming to life, especially after being dead for such a honestly quite a long time. Although there's still a little bit of uncertainty whether or not these two areas of interest will develop, because they are indeed both at a low chance. The first one, disturbance number one, at a 10% chance in the next 48 hours and 7 days, and this is unlikely to develop into anything significant. But then we have another area of disturbance that could form by this weekend off the southern coast of Mexico, and something might try to come out of this. As I did say before, and I will say it again, even if it takes a little bit of time, of course it is still June, the atmosphere is beginning to adjust, getting into hurricane season, and it will take some time, but I assure you the activity will eventually come. And of course, it is doing so right now in the Eastern Pacific, though I guess you can make the argument in the Atlantic it's kind of coming, especially in the MDR. Maybe a little too early, but I mean, you kind of can see how it could happen, especially when you take a look at the sea surface temperature anomaly chart, which the last time I posted was almost a week and a half ago, and we were talking about just how intense the MDR was, and it still is like that. You could still see some of these dark oranges, almost basically ripe red colors here in the northern MDR. This line represents 20 north, which the MDR is usually stretching from 10 to 20 north, and we have a bunch of these very warm salmon anomalies. And one thing very important to mention, keep in mind this 1 degree Celsius mark, and just important how basically all the way from, just notice, all the way from the Baja, not the Baja, the Baja's all the way over here, and we'll actually talk about that in a little bit, but all the way from the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, right here, stretching all the way down from the coast of Africa and into the Caribbean, it is all mostly all consistent of at least 1 degree Celsius if you look at the map. And it is quite incredible. And we'll look at the sea surface temperature chart, the actual sea surface temperatures on the surface in a little bit, but you would think with that and also some other factors, including some people talking about quite the low, quite the amount of low amount of Saharan air or dry air relative to what we usually see this time of year, something that I've been seeing a lot of people talking about, especially with the emergence of models hinting at something over here. But especially when you just take a look at this alone, you would think that something is definitely going to try to get going, because it's really warm out there, and that is not only reflective of things being favorable for this, being June, that things are favorable for something to get going in the MDR now, but maybe could it be a sign for the rest of the year? Because I mean, last time we did have a MDR forming storm this early, mid-June, it was 2017, and kind of coincidental that if something does actually materialize, it would also be the same name, basically, as 2017, because 2017 we had Brett in mid-June in the MDR, and if this forms, this will take the next name on the list, which is Brett 2. Kind of funny. But in the Eastern Pacific, anyways, I was talking about the Eastern Pacific, though, is definitely favorable, at least near the coast of Mexico. It is very warm, especially with this very, mighty looking signature of what could be potentially an onsetting, very strong, maybe not very strong, but very potent El Nino. Whether or not it's strong or moderate, some people are still debating, though a lot are saying that this will probably be a strong. Some even going to the magnitude is saying it'll be a super Nino. We'll have to see though. But generally, there's an El Nino signature developing, and with that, the Eastern Pacific is very warm. But still, just gotta mention how we have all these colder anomalies off the coast of the Baja Peninsula and the western United States coast, and we always talk about that being kind of a signature for a colder PDO look still, and that's not really traditional with El Ninos, or that does not really what we typically see in an El Nino year. And I just gotta mention, sometimes this does tend to reduce convection in the tropical Eastern Pacific more specifically, and especially when you combine that with this monstrous look of a warm MDR, you just gotta wonder what will that do. But anyways, just taking a look at the MDR, and just something you do notice. Of course, one thing, very strong wave coming off the coast of Africa, and indeed this is the wave that we're watching. Then we have the ITCZ kind of stretch all the way into South America, and then into the Eastern Pacific as well. And we'll actually take a look at a Eastern Pacific shot in just a few minutes, but kind of wanting to take a note that you really do lack a bunch of Saharan air. And one thing you could take a look at that is you see these oranges. If you kind of look, you see more of these like hazy colors. I guess you could say that hazy colors off the coast of Africa, so there's definitely some Saharan air. But notice how that does not stretch for the entirety of the MDR, something very unlike what we tend to see, especially this time of year in June. There definitely is some Saharan air out there, and I'll show that map in just a second. I have it pulled up. But definitely it could be worse, and it's something that is kind of fueling the idea of everybody being very interested in indeed what exactly goes on. But really quickly taking a look at the Eastern Pacific, I think that first AOI is somewhere in here. Let's take a look at this really quickly. 110 west. Yeah, probably somewhere in here is that first AOI, and you can see there's a bunch of shear on the western fringes of this whole thing. I'd probably assume there's some sort of upper level anticyclone associated with this, and it's getting sheared from the western portion being on the western side of the anticyclone, so probably why this won't develop. But then we have this very monstrous looking convective situation going on in the Eastern Pacific, and that's the other area of interest that the NHC is mentioning. But I still find it interesting how we're all the way at June 15th, and this is an El Nino year that at least we're expecting that this will be an El Nino year, and we're waiting this long for something to develop. It is something that you kind of gotta question. What could this mean? Something for the future or something? I don't know, but you get what I mean. It's definitely something very questionable. But of course, we'll see if this does try to develop. There's definitely a lot of convective activity associated with it. Probably a sign of the more favorable Eastern Pacific pattern that we're in now, hence why we're seeing more chances to develop. So we'll see. Maybe this does try to develop and become something of a bottom line, an area of interest in both the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic. And speaking of the Atlantic, back to it. Noticing this is the Saharan Air map that I do remember that, if you guys remember, I do mention that I would bring it up, and notice the Saharan Air. So I did mention we definitely do have it, but notice off the coast of Africa, this is usually the type of values that we tend to look at that tend to overtake the entirety of the MDR through most of June. And notice how, very interestingly enough, and this is a little more Saharan air that we've been seeing in comparison to the last several weeks. But still, you just notice that there's a lot more of these bright orange and more or less dark orange colors instead of these bright reds and these almost white colors that we tend to see a lot more often this time of year. And you do also notice, especially because this is the wave right here that the NHC tagged, you notice that there really is also with that not a lot of Saharan air in that area at all. And if you take a look right closer towards the central MDR, right where this is expected to kind of uptick, you notice the valleys of Saharan Air, at least being indicated by the map, we really only see yellows up to maybe bright, very slight oranges indicated on the map. And that's something that a lot of people are talking about, not a lot of Saharan Air. Dry air, which tends to be the biggest problem for waves to develop this time of year. So something to consider, especially when it comes to the development of this storm. And most importantly, the culprit, the reason why we're all watching it, is because of the models too really been uptrending, especially the GFS since the last few days. Having something kind of develop. This is already by hour 54, and this is by hour 72. You notice a very strong, very small, compact system too. Obviously, this is June, so it's not going to be a big, vast, a very big, expansive hurricane. We don't really get those at all till August. In some cases, rare cases, we kind of get those in late July, but those tend to be a lot more rare cases. But generally, there's a signal there. You notice the vorticity signature all the way up towards the top end of the scale, so definitely there's spin with this. And then this kind of moves along in the MDR up until 120 hours out. This still lasts. And you notice here also very important that there's a bunch of closed isobars associated with this. These isobars, these black lines, that definitely represents that there's some sort of closed low with it too. So keep that in mind. We have a closed low, a closed isobar signature, and we have strong vorticity signature. Definitely some sort of sign that there is something that is trying to maybe get going in the MDR. And of course the GFS is not the only model that shows it. Then of course closer towards the end of the run does, I think, battle with maybe some shear a little bit, and this is hour 168, kind of begins to die out as it heads closer towards the islands. Though I'm not going to go any further than 7 days, number one, because that's how far the NHC goes, and number two, if you look at the rest of the model run on the GFS, as per usual GFS things, it does get a little weird and probably is a little unrealistic. If you want to see what I'm talking about for yourself, you can go to Tropical Tidbits and go to the model section and pull up the GFS. But it does get a little bit weird, but bottom line, the GFS is showing something. And gotta mention this, go to the PWAT. This is basically precipitable water anomalies in the MDR. I'm just going to rezoom it because notice something very interesting. This is once again precipitable water, so the amount of potential water in the atmosphere that is available for this. Number one, you see quite a bit of greens representing more precipitable water in the atmosphere associated with this wave coming off the coast of Africa. Then I'm just going to run this in time, and you just notice a bunch of these browns and these, I guess, brown colors that are being represented as less precipitable water. Notice how we really don't have much of those anomalies at all, especially at the time of this thing getting going, roughly around 114, 120 hours out, and basically all the way till the end of the model run, we have a bunch of these greens in the MDR. So basically what that tells us in terms of precipitable water, the content of water in the atmosphere is there. There's not a lot of dry air to really prevent any sort of development, or kind of prevent this wave being suppressed as much as it would in typical years, as because there's not a lot of dry air. And that is the one big problem that systems, especially this time of year, tend to face, is dry air, because of Saharan air and of course natural mid-level dry air that we tend to see this time of year, as we're still early on in the year and we're still transitioning into summer. And compared to this year, we do not have a lot of that being represented in the model. So one thing to take note for, to keep in the back of your mind, especially when it comes to developing this, lack of really significant Saharan air, and of course a very strong tropical wave and very strong sea surface, very warm sea surface temperature anomalies, near record warm. Combine these things together, and maybe some sort of June MDR system like all the models are having is not that outlandish after all. And the GFS is not the only one too. Hinting at it really quickly, I'll show you the European, and you could already see by the signature on the model, the European already has it too. But let me really quickly wind it to the end of the run, and I'll just run through it really quickly. Hour 48, hour 60, hour 72. European, I think, does take a little bit of more time to get going, but by the time we get to hour 120, there's already a signature there. And then by the time we get to hour 144, there's definitely a signature of something that tries to get going in the western central MDR. And then by hour 168, approaching the islands. Actually, very interestingly, this is very close to the islands. That I do find it very interesting. Very close to the islands, and there's still a bona fide signature on the European as well. 7 days out though, so we'll have to see if this does really come to pass, but still interesting nonetheless. Maybe that is something we'll watch for the islands as we head later towards the month of June. In the next week or so, maybe this could pose a threat to the islands. We'll have to see. Still far out though. But really quickly, as I did mention before, sea surface temperature anomalies. We looked at the sea surface temperature anomalies. Now we're looking at the actual sea surface temperatures. And as I did mention multiple times before, we do not have that issue of sea surface temperatures, record-breaking sea surface temperatures out there, basically. And notice something very interesting. Look at the entire MDR, just to give you a perspective, between 10 and 20 north, and basically from the islands all the way out to the coast of Africa. Notice how much coverage we have with the 26 degrees Celsius isotherm. The line, the kind of marking, the check mark that we look at for favorable sea surface temperature anomalies, enough so for tropical cyclone development. Look at the isotherm and how much it extends eastward in the MDR, all the way out till roughly 30 west, really. And even as we get all the way towards the coast of Africa, I assume that's probably as north as 15, 16 north. We have 26 degrees Celsius isotherm reach till up the coast of Africa, all the way up to around 15 north. That is insane, honestly. And then we have all of this ground that this tropical disturbance could work with, and of course this is going to be a much more southern latitude, especially given that it's June. We're still seeing storms travel at more southern latitudes. That's not unusual. We're not seeing a very unusual latitude where this is coming off at 15 or so north, and somewhere within this region we're still somewhere down south here, and especially there we have a lot more consistent 26, 27s, and depending on how south we go, even 28 degrees Celsius readings in the southern MDR. So one thing's for sure, this does not have issue with sea surface temperature anomalies. So sea surface temperatures more specifically. So we'll see. Will this develop? Will this try? Or will this really have, or will this hold itself back? Because honestly, I'll just say it straight up. Really, there really isn't much for this not to, or much to give a reason as to why this might not try, except if you want to say climatology. But putting climatology aside, the factors relative to climatology for this time of year, they are favorable. So there really is no reason to kind of say that this won't try at all. Personally, I think it will. But how much, we'll have to see. All depends on what it tries to do itself. Anyways, really quickly taking a look at severe weather. Of course, it is June. We're no longer in the hardest severe weather season, but it's still occurring. Today, moderate risk over Texas and Oklahoma, and potential for giant hail. And I actually saw videos, I think, of giant hail being observed over portions of the south and the south central from the last week or so. So there's definitely been some severe weather occurring over the last week. And just really quickly taking a look at the day one outlook, moderate chance for severe weather over Texas and Oklahoma. The tornado risk is there, 10% chance, but this really does seem to be a wind and a hail risk where we might see the most amount of threat for that, up to 45% chance for significant hail. And we also have a hatched area as well. And of course, when it comes to severe weather, we know the hatched area tends to mean the chance for hail of 1 inch diameter or larger at least within 25 miles of the point in the hatched area. So definitely a chance for significant weather today. Tomorrow it does kind of quiet down a little bit though. Slight risk still in effect for the south. And then we also have a slight risk closer to my backyard in the northeast, in southern Jersey, and of course portions of Maryland and Delaware. Slight risk for severe weather there, and the threat seems to be wind and hail. And of course tomorrow, not much of a tornado risk, and then day 3, another slight chance for Texas and Oklahoma. So definitely some severe weather occurring to watch over the next few weeks. And of course tornadoes is also another threat that we look at when it comes to weather. Of course, this year, since we're in June and we're away from the hottest severe weather season, we tend to look more at tropical systems. But of course, tornadoes will always be there, and we probably still will see the chance for tornadoes and tornado outbreaks and stuff of that nature still. So for the rest of the year, probably will slowly die down as we head closer towards, of course, the fall and winter months when it really begins to die down in terms of severe weather down south. But of course, we still have that risk, and it'll definitely be interesting to see what does occur with that. But other than that, we're talking about the chance for MDR activity, and of course, something in the Eastern Pacific. Very interesting to see where this goes, most specifically with this MDR system, and of course, very interested as well to see if this means anything for the season, because we do remember the last time this happened, the season did get very interesting later on. So who knows? Does this mean something later on for the season? We'll have to see. But anyways, that's going to wrap it up for today's discussion. A lot of interesting things going on, and of course I will try to post tomorrow as a result. Maybe I'm going to be a little busy, but I'll try to post tomorrow and give you an update on whatever's going on with what we have, or with the information that we receive tomorrow on any of this. But with that being said, other than that, I'm going to close off for tonight. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to all. And we'll talk again soon.